Okay, friends, we are ready to start our sleeves. Before I started knitting sweaters, this was the part that intimidated me the most. And by the end of it, it is one of the most fun parts because we're almost to the end and it feels like the end is in sight. so, Congratulations on making it this far. So, we're going to dive into the instructions here. So, for the sleeves, place 26 up to 84, depending on your size, held stitches back onto larger needles. So these are the stitches that we put on the waist yarn when we split apart for the sleeves and the body. So those should all still be on your waist yarn as of right now, but we're going to put those back onto needles, and I'll show you that in a moment. And then we have a setup round. So in order to account for the extra width that we need that is under the arms, we are going to remember that we cast on a number of stitches as we were starting the body. So we are going to pick up stitches where those cast on stitches were, and then also use the stitches around the armhole opening to make a big enough hole for our arm to go through and account for those stitches for the sleeve. It'll become more apparent when I show you than when I'm explaining it right here. But because we had cast on those stitches under the arm, we now have to pick up those stitches so that we can knit them and we have an appropriate circumference for our armhole. So we're going to do that with, for me, it's 2. I'm knitting the smallest size. It's going to be more if you're knitting a larger size. And then we're going to knit around the stitches that we put back on the needle from our waist yarn. And then we're going to pick up and knit more for the underarm. And we're going to, when we do the first set of pick up and knit, we're going to start at the middle of those cast on stitches. So we need to knit some at the beginning, knit all the way around the sleeve, and then knit some on the end. And then it shows us the stitches we're going to have, the stitch count we're going to have at the end. What I'm going to do is show you a little trick when we're picking up those stitches to minimize or eliminate the holes that can sometimes happen when we're picking up and knitting under the sleeve. So you will actually end up with 2 more stitches than this stitch count that I've highlighted shows. So if you want to go ahead right now and look at how many is listed here for your end stitch count when after you've done the setup round, add 2, write that number down because we're going to need it in a few minutes. So, and then this little note here has throughout the sleeve until the cuff, continue the garter panel as established. So I will point that out to you when we get to that point. After we have done the setup round and we're going to start knitting the sleeve. There's a few different options here for how long you want your sleeves. Be sure that you have, highlighted or circled what directions you're going to want to do if you want short 3/4 length or the long sleeves. I'm going to do the long sleeves, so that's what I'm going to go over here. We will be working, for me, 2 inches in the pattern before we start a decreased round, and the decreases will be a separate video. But for now, in this video, I'm going to show you how to do all the setup stuff and then get started in working down to this appropriate length for you and the size that you're making. So I'm going to switch to my other camera and we will get going on that. So if you didn't have to break out your larger needles for your yoke section, you will now. You're going to need this flexible needle in order to do the magic loop and knit the smaller diameter, smaller circumference of the sleeves. So we're going to pick a sleeve. It doesn't matter which size first or which side first. Just pick one. I'm going to pick the one that I don't have my stitches on. So here is underneath. This is where we cast on the stitches. I am going to go ahead and take my needle, starting on the last stitch here on my waste yarn, and just start placing those stitches back on my needle. When we get to the spot on the garter ridges, if you're choosing to do that option, it can be helpful to put a stitch marker there so that when we get to that point as we're knitting around, it reminds us that we may need to do some purl stitches there to keep the garter section garter and not switching it to stockinette, which is what the body is. If you did not do garter, then no need to place the marker anywhere. We're going to go for as close to half as we can get. It doesn't have to be exact. And then just kind of when we get to the top here, this is going to be about half, and then I'm going to pull my long cable. Doesn't have to be all the way through, but most of the way through. We don't want to pull the other needle out all the way, but most of the way through there. And then make sure we don't miss any. We're going to place the rest of them on. This is where I'm getting to my garter panel. New marker. Whoop. And finish out these stitches. So all of them are on my needles and ready to continue. This last one, I usually have a little bit of trouble. It's a little tighter for some reason. So gotta finagle that a little bit. All right, once I have all my stitches on my needles, I can cut my waste yarn and pull it right out. You can see why it's important to have waste yarn be a different color. So I was able to identify those stitches on hold very easily because they were not red in my case. All right. So this shows you how we're getting our magic loop here. We're setting up for that. We're going to end up with about half the stitches on one side, half the stitches on the other, and then we can knit them pretty easily here. I'm going to push that second needle the rest of the way through, and then we will be ready to pick up the stitches under the arm. So I ended up casting on 4 underneath here. You can see here I've got these 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to start picking up in the middle. Of course, 4 is evenly divisible. We want the middle to kind of be odd, but so we have 4. I'm going to be starting with the left 2. And I'm going to go under here, also under here. If we look kind of from the top here, you can see there's a loop here. I'm going under both strands of that loop. Okay, I'm holding in my left hand, I'm holding the fabric steady so that I can go underneath both. And then I will grab my yarn. My end is facing upward away from me. And I'm going to make a loop around here just as though I'm knitting it. I'm going to pull the loop through just like we pull a loop through when we're knitting. And now I have 1 stitch on the needle. I need 1 more, so I'm going to go, you see my little loop here? That under. I'm going to go under both. Strands. Oops, I ended up grabbing both my working and my non-working yarn. Okay, just want my working yarn and pull a loop through. Okay, so I had 2. Remember, we added 2 stitches to what our final stitch count's going to be, because I said I'm going to show you how to make sure you don't end up with a big old hole. That's for right here. Okay, so I've picked up both stitches that I cast on underneath. And now I'm going to add 1 more stitch here that we will decrease in the next row. So, do you see this hole right here? I have 1 strand coming this way, 1 strand coming this way, and then it kind of twists right there. I'm going to go under that twist with my right needle and make a stitch right there. Pull up and pull through. I'm going to show you again. Try to make it as obvious as possible. Right here, you see how this strand of yarn twists all the way around? We're going to go underneath there, make a stitch. Then we're going to knit around on all those stitches that we just put on our needle. I've made it to my garter stitch panel, and I'm ready to purl. I know I'm ready to purl because if I give this just a tiny little tug, you'll see that this bump is not right up next to my stitches up here. So I know I'm ready to purl. I'll show you what it looks like after I've purled these, and if yours looks like this, then you're ready to knit a row. See how the bumps right here are right up next to, when I see that, when I come around again, I'll know it's time to knit those stitches. So I'm going to flip my work around since I've made it to the end of the stitches on that needle. I'm going to take my cord, excuse me, pull that cord into a nice big loop over here, push my needle back in. I'm going to pull this other needle out. I'm interrupting my previously recorded session here to make a note. When you're doing a purl round on the garter panel and it is bisected here by where we are switching our needles over, I wanted to make sure that you noted that, here, I'll take it back. Your yarn here is straight down. We're going to pull it straight down, pull out our needle. We come in here over to our other side as if to knit. I want to make sure that you're pulling your yarn underneath that working needle and then up to start purling. I'll show you what happens if you do not do this. If you haven't pulled it underneath and you pull it over and then try to do a purl stitch, you're going to end up with 2 strands. And then the next time you come around, you're going to say, what in the world? What happened there? And I've done this before. I got there and I knitted them both, and then my sleeves started to increase in size, and that's not what we want. So in order to avoid that, I'm going to go in here as if to purl before I grab my yarn. I'm pulling it under, excuse me, under my working needle before I continue on. Another one of those things I figured out the hard way, and I hope you can avoid my mistakes. We're still on this first round, so I'm going to pick up the other set. At the underarm so that it matches the first side. All right, again, so that we avoid holes. This yarn right here is twisting around. I'm going to go under there. Knit, pull up a stitch, and then I'm going to knit under the other two that I cast on. It kind of helps me if this is the tail, the end that I started with. If I pull that a little bit, I can see where the last stitch was, or the first stitch on the other side that I picked up. So then I can kind of work backwards, knowing I need 2 more. There's the first one I need. Here's the second one I need. That's a little bit confusing. I'm going to show you with these other needles I have right here. So looking at the top, this is where one goes. See how I have 2 and there's a loop there? I'm going to move up right next to its neighbor. There's the other one. And this will be the first one I do. It's not absolutely critical that you get it in the absolutely right spot under here. What our goal is to get the correct number of stitches evenly as we can along this armpit area. So if you end up going under and it's only under like 1 strand of yarn, that's fine. You're not going to lose it or anything. So don't get too caught up on that. I wanted 4 right under here, not counting my 2 extras. So if I ended up with 4, I'm good. So then at this point, you will pull the cable through, pull your needles through, leave some of a loop with your cable, and count your stitches. You should have that number that you wrote down earlier, which is the number of underarm stitches the pattern had plus 2. At this point, we will just continue to knit around and around and around until we get to that length that we discussed from our pattern. Mine was 2 inches, yours may be longer. And we want to make sure that we're continuing to, when we get to the point in between the 2 stitch markers, that we knit 1 round, purl the next round, so that we keep this garter stitch panel going. So meet me back here once you've knitted the appropriate length, and I will show you how to start the decreases. One bit I forgot, I'm going to tell you now. After you have done your first row, that is where we picked up the underarm and we knit all the way around and picked up on the other side. We're going to add a stitch marker. This is our first row, and then I will add another one every 6 rows. So I guess it would be every 7th row we'll put on a new stitch marker. This is going to help us when we get to our other sleeve so that we don't have to count every single row and know that, oh, the first one was 76 stitches or 76 rows. And so now I'm going to count 76 rows. Or it was 12 rows before I started decreasing or whatever it was. That way we will avoid all of that. So I put a marker on my first row, and then every 6 rows, I'm going to add another stitch marker so that it makes my life easier later. I'm so sorry. This video is like when you're having an argument and you walk out of the room and then you keep coming back and saying, and one more thing. This is the last thing. Because we added that extra stitch to help with the hole issue, the first round that we're going around again. So I have just finished my picking up, knitting around the first time, picking up the other stitches on the other side. This is the very next round. This is not in the pattern. This is, Callista has done enough of these to kind of figure out what works, and it isn't always in the pattern. we're going to knit until one stitch before the added stitch that we had. So for me, the pattern said to do 2. I did 2 and then did the special one. So in order to knit 1 before, I'm going to knit 1. And I know you may have a slightly different number if you're knitting a larger size, but the point is you're knitting to 1 before the special stitch. We're going to knit the special stitch together with the one before it. So I'm skipping this one for now. I'm coming in just as if to knit under the special stitch and then also going in under that last regular stitch, knitting them together. Then I'm going to knit around as usual. This brings your stitch count back to what the original stitch count on the pattern said you should have. I'm going to show you what we're going to do on the other side. My other stitch markers are clacking away on my desk, so sorry for that extra noise. So on this side, we're going to knit right up to the special stitch. That is not a technical term. That's just what I'm calling it. So for me, that was the third one from the end. That special stitch. We're going to knit it together with the one next to it and then knit till the end. And this brings my stitch count back to the original stitch count from the pattern. And now we will continue to knit until we get the first sleeve length done there.